Sinai, but I can't say that I can teach anybody here how to fight the hostile environment, because a lot of people here know much more about that than I do, and people here have been at the receiving end of it. So, what I have done in my writing and the activism that I have done, I spent a lot of time writing about why is there a hostile environment, because once upon a time we didn't have one. I don't mean that there wasn't hostility towards migrants and towards refugees. There always has been, for different reasons. But the hostile environment is new. And I think of the hostile environment not just in terms of a set of procedures and laws, but a set of attitudes that are embedded in society, that have become embedded, have become empowered, if you like. So a lot of the stuff that I've written about in terms of writing about European borders and the UK, in terms of the One Day Without Us campaign, was how to combat that and where does it come from. So I'd just like to share a few observations with you that might be useful in understanding the present situation. I don't know how many of you have seen the very moving documentary about Mo Farah, in which he talks about his background as a trafficked child. Yeah. For those who haven't seen the programme, Farah describes how he was brought into the country as a child to become a domestic servant using a faked passport. He wasn't a refugee. He crossed the UK border under false pretences with the name that he now has. And he showed great courage in revealing his past, and his teacher was also extremely courageous in publicly discussing how he once helped Farah get a new passport to enable him to compete abroad. All this was illegal then, and it still is, but Farah's fame and his knighthood have protected him from the repercussions that would befall most other people who told similar stories. So the Home Office have said that they won't act against him or against anyone else involved in his irregular arrival in the UK. Many other people have been deported for less than that, including men and women who've been here all their lives and never got a passport. And the reason I talk about this now is because Farah's case touches on an essential hypocrisy at the heart of the UK's cruel border policies. It's a hypocrisy which has been revealed yet again by the Migration and Economic Development Partnership with Rwanda. In his Dover speech announcing the policy, our soon-to-be-gone Prime Minister said that the policy was intended to provide safe and legal routes for asylum and disrupt the business model of the criminal gangs responsible for what he called a barbaric trade in human misery. This pseudo-humanitarian rhetoric has been a feature of the political conversation about borders, migrants and refugees in this country for many years. And the crueler the policy, the more humanitarian the rhetoric. So many people have criticised the Rwanda policy on ethical grounds, yet Tory politicians insist on portraying the Rwanda plan as a response to people smugglers and criminal gangs who organise the channel crossings. Sometimes, and this is the point I wanted to make about the Mo Farah documentary, sometimes the government calls it smuggling, and sometimes they call it trafficking, even though these words refer to two very different things. Trafficking is something that's done through force, coercion, or deception, as was the case with Mo Farah. Like him, victims of trafficking will almost always have a passport and a visa in the first instance, and they generally don't know what's going to happen to them until it's too late. That's not what's happening in the Channel. The 27, maybe more, men and women and children who drowned last December may have died because the boat that they were sailing in was flimsy and overloaded and they weren't given life belts, but they weren't trafficked. They came of their own free will within the limited options available to them. One of the women who drowned simply wanted to marry her fiancé, who already lives in the UK, and she wouldn't have had to make that crossing if another route had been available to her. The government knows this. It knows that most people crossing the Channel come to the UK in order to claim asylum. It knows that most of these claims are upheld, and it wants to stop this from happening. But it can't say openly, we don't want any more refugees, because that would mean openly breaching its treaty obligations and damaging the UK's international reputation. And so it does what many other governments do, what the European Union has done. It presents border enforcement as a moral crusade. It uses misleading terms like trafficking to describe smuggling, and it does this to conceal its own cruelty and the cruelty that the public has now become part of. So by depicting refugees as victims of criminal exploitation, the government invites the public to see the deportations to Rwanda as an act of liberation. As the Tory contender Tom Tugendhat put it earlier this month, he said, "The Rwanda policy is a totem," he called it. "It is supposed to show that Britain, quote, does not tolerate human trafficking and the misery of slavery." There's no evidence whatsoever that the men and women crossing the Channel are coming to the UK for this reason. If the UK was serious about trafficking, it would put real victims of trafficking, it would not put real victims of trafficking in detention. It would not deport victims of trafficking. It would provide better support to victims of trafficking so that more victims would be willing to come forward without risking losing their right to stay in the UK. Instead, politicians insist on conflating trafficking with smuggling. They depict refugees as victims of exploitation with no agency and no motives of their own. They appeal to morality and justice for policies that have no justice and no moral basis. And as I said before, none of this is unique to the UK. That the cruelty of UK migration policy is a product of a very specific political context. One of the promises made by Johnson and others during the EU referendum was that the UK would be better able to control our borders, as he puts it, if we left the European Union. Well, what happened? The new phenomenon of small boat crossings has made the Johnson government look weak in its own eyes. And so these crossings have become a political symbol in which the government seeks to demonstrate its toughness on immigration through a constant escalation of restricted laws, procedures and crackdowns. That's why we got the Nationality and Borders Act. That's why we got the Rwanda policy. Pushbacks, the use of the military, wave machines to turn back migrant votes. All these measures were proposed before the government made Rwanda the flagship symbol of its toughness at the border. Never mind that the Home Office Committee this month pointed out that the numbers of people crossing the Channel in 2021 were just over half the number who applied for asylum in 2002. The committee asked the government for evidence to justify the Rwanda policy. It hasn't come up with any. This month it was revealed that the UK High Commissioner to Rwanda warned against the policy and said, in effect, it was unsafe for refugees to be sent to Rwanda. The Rwanda government has now said it will only accept 200 deportees at any one time, even though Johnson once promised that tens of thousands would be sent there. The government hasn't budged. In fact, it's doubled down, and so have its successors. During the Tory leadership contest, all the contenders insisted they would carry out the policy, and some of them have gone further. Rishi Sunak wants to detain refugees in cruise ships. Liz Truss wants to deport them to other countries as well as Rwanda. Commitment to the Rwanda policy is now a badge of honour for a hard right government catering to the hard right base inside and outside the Tory party. Bear in mind that it was Nigel Farage who first began to draw attention to the Channel crossings in Kent. This symbolism is important. None of the Tory contenders have addressed the multiple criticisms of the Rwanda policy on moral grounds and on cost effectiveness. None of them appear to analyse whether it will actually work as a deterrent in its own terms. In effect, refugee policy has become another culture war battle. To criticise the Rwanda policy means you are soft on immigration or you're woke. Even the Archbishop of Canterbury is woke because he criticised the Rwanda policy. Theresa May is also woke, as improbable as that seems. So if your aim is to appeal to the worst instincts of the Tory party and the worst instincts of the British population, you're not going to care if the policy works or not. You won't provide evidence because the people you're appealing to don't care about evidence. And they certainly don't care about the Geneva Convention on Refugees. The only thing that matters is the performative cruelty and the immediate political benefits that a floundering government hopes to gain from it. So when lawyers oppose deportations, they become activist lawyers and lefty lawyers. When the European Court of Human Rights rules against the Rwandan deportations, this becomes another example of Europe telling us what to do. The government then uses that ruling to push forward a British Bill of Rights that will reduce the likelihood of such interventions in the future. In effect, the ability to restrict more people and deport more people has become a demonstration of our national sovereignty. So all this is incredibly reckless and dangerous. And not only for refugees, cruel policy makes a nation cruel, especially in a time of political and economic crisis. The hostile environment once provided a distraction from austerity. Now, Migrants are being scapegoated once again by a government with no moral compass. At a time when there are no other Brexit opportunities in sight, the government has followed Farage's lead and returned to the old songs that it played during the referendum. Why don't critics of the Rwanda policy suggest alternatives, they ask? Well, people have. They call for more safe routes to make it easier for people to make their claims without risking their lives. They call for claims to be assessed in Calais. They call for more care workers to speed up the application process in the UK so that tens of thousands of refugees are not stranded in hotels. The government is not interested in any of this. It wants to stop people from coming here to seek asylum, or at least to show that it's trying to stop them coming, and is prepared to go even further than its predecessors. So all this is very bad news for those campaigning for a more generous and humane treatment of migrants and asylum seekers. But there are more positive possibilities. The criticisms of the Rwanda policy have reached across the political spectrum. They include campaigning groups and the opposition parties up to a point, to the Church of England and the RMT. Many people are disgusted by this policy and ashamed of it. The polls show that more people oppose it than support it. UNHCR has called for the UK asylum system to be humane, fair, affordable, in line with international standards and efficient. The cross-party Home Affairs Committee shares this vision and believes it to be attainable. In other words, there are coalitions that can be built around these objectives. The government's arguments are weak and incoherent. Its humanitarianism is hollow. There are bricks in this wall of hostility that can be pulled loose. And in the end, the task for those of us who believe in fairness and justice is the same as it always was: how to widen and strengthen the bonds of solidarity and empathy. To paraphrase John Donne, we are not islands entire of ourselves. We are part of the continent, a part of the main. We are all connected to this troubled and difficult world. We can't build walls to keep those out who come to us for help without doing a disservice to them and to ourselves. We can replace this culture of cruelty with the humanity and the generosity that Mo Farah's teachers and social workers once extended to him. We can create a country where refugees and victims of trafficking don't have to win an Olympic gold medal in order not to be deported. Thank you.
I think if I can just ask you to stay there, and then we'll get people to ask you some questions. I just want to just say something about the hostile environment. Doesn't just affect